Hello and welcome to the Tech Guy's Spontaneous live stream. Had a few things I wanted to say, so I thought I'd get started. I'm a little more prepared in the sense that I set up my Twitter and my Gabs before I hit live, so hopefully that'll draw in a few more people. I want to thank anyone who chooses to join us. Again, I've decided not to do regular podcasts. I've decided to basically do live streams as the mood hits me and when I have something to say. And while actually would have preferred to have done the live stream a few days later, some of the things I want to say about are time sensitive, so I thought I'd bring them here. I want to throw in a link to begin with. And this is a link to something you should be reading. I've read the first 3 parts, I've skimmed the 4th. And the story is how DJT, Donald Trump, lost the White House, Chapter 3, crashing the White House. And what I've read so far is very depressing in the sense that everything that I've suspected has pretty much been the case, with one exception. The exception being that I figured that the president had his ducks in a row on this stuff and was more prepared for it. And when I see that the approach was taken differently, the political approach, when I see that people had figured out what was going on, people were ready to gave the president this information. The people were ready to go with actual evidence rather than the stuff that was done. And at first, it seemed as though they had convinced him, but then once the swamp creatures got a hold of him, it was back to business as usual. I found it depressing. I mean, you should read all 4 parts. I haven't finished part 4. I've read parts 1, 2, and 3, and I found it depressing. I found it very depressing because it gave the potential for victory, but in the election, the potential to prove the fraud, potential to put the evidence before the American people in a timely manner when it would have made a difference. But something happened this week that convinced me that even if this had happened, even if the proof was out there, it would not have mattered. And what convinced me was the Liz Cheney vote. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Democrats rushed through the impeachment of a second impeachment of Donald Trump. No hearings, no evidence, because they were in a rush to get this in because they're still terrified of him. And the reason why they're still terrified of him is bluntly, they know they didn't win the last election, honestly. When you are illegitimate, when your government is illegitimate, when your election is illegitimate, you're very much afraid. When you've first stolen something, you're very much afraid. And that people are going to stand up. It's sort of like Hitler moving into the Rhineland, where he ordered his troops, if the French show any opposition, run away. Well, the French didn't show any opposition, so Hitler was able to move into the Rhineland. And this is the nature of appeasement, but of course, this isn't taught in American schools because we no longer teach history. We no longer teach reality in American schools. But the Cheney vote was very important. There were 10 Republicans who ended up voting for impeachment. Now, I'm sure there were 1 or 2 of them who were foolish, who were just simply foolish, who bought the media hype because of inexperience. But there are other, and it's ironic because, of course, the Republicans gained all kinds of seats during election 2020. So a lot of these people probably have owed their seats to Donald Trump. But for whatever reason, 10 Republicans voted against them. And a lot of these guys are already feeling the heat. And Liz Cheney was feeling the heat specifically because she's in the leadership. And it's very hard to lead your caucus when you're giving Democrat talking points and running off of Democrat talking points. But what really gets me about this is, of course, the man who was counting the votes for the people trying to get rid of Cheney said he had the votes. People were committing to him. But once you reach a point where the vote became secret, then suddenly the GOP members of Congress, the people who were supposed to be there fighting for us, turned tail and ran. And I want to read you a quote from this deep capture site. This is from Patrick Byrne, the person writing the story. And it looked like it, and it's I want you to read this. This is when the people, Sidney Powell, Mr. Byrne, and General Flynn are in the room with the president. They finally got in to see him. And they're trying to convince the president, of course, to change the path of how he's challenging this election. And I want you to read that. I want you to hear this. After some time, 20 or 30 minutes, three lawyers, I'm going to jump around because I want to get it all in, get enough of it in for you to understand what I'm talking about. After 20, 30 minutes, three lawyers appeared together. They didn't introduce themselves and stood huddling in the back of the Oval Office, listening. In addition, Mark Meadows and someone else joined by speakerphone. Eventually, the lawyers came back in, muttering things to make their displeasure and disagreement evident. I said again, sir, CEO to CEO, you are not being served well by those around in your White House. I've gotten to know staffers in your White House, and they are being told that leadership here is telling them to get you to concede. Trump started to say something to Mike and Sidney, but stopped himself and turned back to me. Who wants me to concede? I was taken aback by his anger because I thought what I was telling him was common knowledge. I thought it was generally understood that about half the White House was in on the program of getting him to concede, and for that was the estimate I was repeatedly told. Sir, I'm surprised you're surprised. In your White House, leadership is telling junior staff everywhere. I am told that this fellow, Pat Chipotle, indicating the lawyers behind me as I spoke, not knowing which one, has been telling people since November 4th. Just get the president to concede. And for the last couple of weeks, Mark Meadows has been telling staff, help me get the president to transition mode. Now, at this point, Chipotle denies it and is saying they won't give a direct denial, but they give excuses. And he says, sir, in 30 minutes, I can have a number of staffers from within your White House to tell you these are quotes from Pat Chipotle and Mark Meadows. The guy's lying to you from through his teeth. They want you to lose. Did you know that this is his last day? He has a job starting Monday at a law firm up the street, getting 10 times what I can pay him here. Pat, can you imagine? And this is Donald Trump speaking. Pat, can you imagine what I could have gotten done if I had not been fighting my own people? And when they suggest, listen, grab these ballot boxes, have it recounted, stream it, and have the National Guard do it. And Chipotle saying the press would tear you apart. Sidney and Mike and I were both thinking, the press is going to tear him apart? Really? What are they doing now? At some point, Chipotle says, never in American history has this kind of challenge been to an election. Flynn responded, never in American history has been there a situation like this, with counting being shut down for hours, foreigners connecting to our equipment, and so on. And it goes on like this for a while. So finally, we get to this point. Flynn sprung to his feet with a grace and ease that surprised me, a surfer getting on his board. He turned to face the three lawyers standing over and barking at Alyssa. In a measured tone, he asked of the three lawyers, let's get something clear. What do you think happened on November 3rd? Do you think it was a fair election? There was nothing unusual about it in your eyes? The three lawyers looked down, stuck their toes in the dirt, and glanced at each other out of the corners of their eyes and would not give an answer. And this is basically what the president was facing. And the reason I bring this up in connection with the Liz Cheney vote is this. Let's say we have Pennsylvania decide to get on the ball and challenge these results. Let's say Arizona does. Let's say Wisconsin's done. Let's say they did the checking. Let's say they produced the evidence and it goes to the House. What do you think the House does? We've all been assuming, and this is where Mitch McConnell may have been wiser than us in one respect in knowing how the swamp thinks. If there's one thing about Mitch McConnell, he knows the swamp. He lives in it, he thrives in it, and he knows how the swamp thinks. What do you think would have happened if the vote went to the House? Now, granted, this is not I don't know if this is a secret ballot or not, but what do you think happens when the individual states vote? When you have 150 or 120, whatever the vote was for Liz Cheney, Republicans who are willing to keep a person going along with the Democrats. That tells me that when it came down to a vote, these guys would have turned on him. These guys would have elected Biden, even though they had the majorities, even everything that meant, they would have done it. And the reason why they would have done it is they would have done it to protect the swamp. And I talked about this in a previous podcast, how all of these guys, their families, their friends live off the swamp. They make their money off the swamp. They're rewarded by the swamp. And if they go in, they play along, they're promised you're going to have a job. You're going to have a lobbying job. When you're out of Congress, you're going to have money. Your kids are going to be hired. When you have trouble, people are going to look the other way. There's a very funny Babylon Bee piece about Marilyn Manson, the rocker who's just been accused of assault, and it says Manson deflects assault accusations by declaring himself a Democrat candidate for Congress. Basically, when I saw the Cheney vote, I realized something. I realized that even with the evidence in front of their faces, the Republican congressmen would not have. They would give an election to Biden because they are part of the swamp. Because the swamp and what it can do for them is more important. And while reading this, the Burns account and his account boasts of first of finding the fraud, displaying the fraud, Rudy Giuliani's inability to deal with the reality, and then the inability to at first convincing the president, and then once they're out of the White House, the swamp slow walking them to the point. And again, it was all just a delaying action. The idea was to delay things long enough so that it would not be practical. That's what it was all about. I hate to think that I'm naive. I mean, I am not. I'm older. I'm 57. I'll be 58 this year. I've seen a lot. But I really thought that if the evidence was presented, people would do the right thing. And I realized when I saw the Cheney vote, no, they wouldn't have. And I feel upset at myself, really. Not so much upset at the swamp creatures, not so much upset at these people because I shouldn't have expected better. And maybe it's the Catholic in me. Maybe it's the optimist in me. Maybe it's, you have to be an optimist to wear this silly hat. But, and I don't wear it often. I haven't worn it in a while. But maybe I thought that they would do the right thing if it had gotten that far. And I think, frankly, it would have been more disappointing to have gotten that far and to watch them sell us out. I think it would have been I mean, it would have been the right thing to do. Don't get me wrong. It was the right thing to do. We should have done it. Should have been done. These people should have been made to betray. They should have been made to openly betray their constituents. Some of them would have done it. They would have, and believe me, the ones who did it would have been set for life. The ones who did it, the swamp would have made sure they were set for life. But it would have been right to make them do it. But it would have been crushing. I know it would have been the right thing to do, and it would have been important to make them do this publicly, to make them betray us publicly. But it would have been a crushing moment. It would have really been a crushing moment. And I have to say that it would have been I would have been horrible. And it would have been even more horrible for some people, for other people. It just would have been horrible. It should have happened. It would have been better for the country if it happened. But it is a mercy that we didn't have to see it happen. Of course, we should always look at things in the light of truth. And in that respect, I'm slightly grateful to the Republican caucus in the House for letting us know how they really feel. I really can't. It's good to know that the only way we're going to be able to drag these people to do the right thing is to drag them screaming and kicking. That's just how it is. And that's how we're going to have to deal with it. But enough of this gay banter. Now let's turn to a little bit of sports. I'm going to talk about Super Bowl 55, which if it wasn't for the fact that Tom Brady was in it, I would not care. I've never been a big football fan. I'm upset about the woke football. And I've been following Brady forever because he is the best at what he does. And I believe I've explained that Tom Brady, and I explained it on the blog, but not here, that some people are saying he's now the GOAT of all sports, and I disagree. I think he is third behind Babe Ruth, who won titles early and late in his career. I put Ruth first because he did it not only as a spectacular hitter, but as one of the top pitchers in the league. He won his first 2 titles while he was one of the top pitchers in the league. And for Brady to be the equal of Ruth, he will have to either win more titles, in my mind, or he'll have to win a title while playing linebacker at the highest of levels. I also put him behind Bill Russell, who won 11 titles in 12 chances. While it's easier to win a title in basketball and baseball, frankly, because you can have a bad game or your opponent can have a great game and you can still win a best of 7 series. But Russell won his last 2 rings as player coach. And while Brady is an unofficial coach, having to coach while you're actually defending someone and keeping track of the ball and making decisions while you're on the court, that's amazing. And until Brady becomes player coach, I still give the edge to Russell. I mean, interestingly, Russell, both Brady, Russell, and Ruth all have won titles in Boston. But outside of that, this is probably going to be the hardest Super Bowl to pick. In terms of quality, you can't get. I mean, you've got Brady versus Mahomes. Mahomes is the best young player in the game. Brady is the best player in the history of the game. If I was the NFL, I would be cheering this matchup because not only does Brady give Brady, let's be blunt. The only reason why a lot of people like me are interested in the Super Bowl is Brady is there, and Brady is considered a surrogate for Trump in their minds. In the same way that if you put a Trump sign in front of your house, you might get a key, you might get your car keyed, you might get your house egged in blue states like mine. If you put an American flag out, you don't get it. That doesn't happen automatically. You can cheer for a Donald Trump fan can cheer for will cheer for Tom Brady. Brady is a surrogate for Trump in that matter. But Tom Brady should be cheered for simply because he's Tom Brady and simply because he emboldens all the values that the left rejects: hard work, dedication, love, actual love of your neighbor. I mean, think of what he did for Antonio Brown, for example. A person who had plenty of grief. I'm going to bring him in. I'm going to help him out. I'm going to try and make things better for him. And in the same sense, doing it for us, same as Trump did for us. These are the Christian values that Tom Brady has, and does them explicitly instead of doing them theoretically. I'm going to throw $100,000 here. I am helping this guy out. This guy I know who needs help. Now you might think, oh, Antonio Brown, he's just a sports guy. Well, maybe. But you try going from making 10 or 15 million a year to almost nothing and see how that changes your perspective. And see what happens when someone bails you out there. It's not what you have, it's how far you fall. That's why the swamp is so desperate to stay in the swamp, because they do not dare want to fall. In terms of a game, who do you bet against? It's not who do you support, it's who do you bet against. No one in their right mind bets against Tom Brady, but no one in their right mind bets against Patrick Mahomes. I don't, in terms of quality teams versus quality teams, this is probably one of the best, if not the best, potential Super Bowls of my lifetime. And I'm not even going to be able to watch it because I'm going to be working. I work Sundays. So we're all going to be working, and there's no TVs where we're working, and I don't have a cell phone, so I can't watch the game. So that's just the way it is. But if for actual football fans, this is going to be a great game, barring some freak injury. And it will probably turn on a mistake, in my opinion, because you're dealing with two high-quality teams, high-quality levels. Either side will exploit a mistake. You have while Mahomes is given the edge, I think Tampa Bay has an advantage because they might be sans two linemen, offensive linemen, the Kansas City, because of COVID restrictions. And if that happens, the defense of Tampa Bay has a better chance of getting to Mahomes. Now, Mahomes has the physical tools. Brady has the mental tools. So, and that's why Brady's lasted so many years, because his physical tools compared to other quarterbacks were never all that high. So when his physical tools declined, it wasn't much of a loss, because all his primary skills are mental decision making. Mahomes makes good decisions, but basically has the physicality to bail him out. So it's going to be a great game. And I would be, again, a lot of Trump people are going to watch that game because of it. If you made me pick, I would pick the Bucks, not because it's just Brady, but because of that offensive line thing is the difference. And plus, if you're doubling, there's so many people to double, they can't double Gronkowski. And if they're not doubling Gronkowski, you know he's going to make a key catch at a key moment. I mean, I'm sorry, you can't. If you're not doubling Gronkowski, you're not doubling Evans. If you're not doubling Evans, you're not doubling Antonio Brown and all these other ones. I mean, there's just too many weapons. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So it's going to turn. I think the game's going to turn on a mistake or on the loss of those two offensive linemen. If Kansas City gets it, the offensive linemen, it could go either way. If you make me pick, I'm going to say Tampa Bay, but this is a pick 'em game. I would not want to bet money on it because I have no idea. But all of this brings me to another point I wanted to bring up, and it's the point I wanted to mention. And it's the correlation between Tom Brady leaving the Patriots and what it does to Bill Belichick and the Patriots, and Donald Trump out of the White House and what it does for blue states. And this is an analogy that you might not understand, you might not see, but I think it's really big. Okay, I'm going to tweet this out to try and get a few more eyeballs. Now talking why Brady, why Patriots, sans Brady is like blue states, sans Donald Trump. Live here. Have the right link. Okay. Let's put that on both Gab and Twitter. We'll Gab that out first. And now we'll Twitter that out. As Tom Brady is like blue state sans Donald Trump. Okay. So now let me explain the difference. I'm going to start with Tom Brady and what it means to the Patriots. Now, one of the advantages of having Tom Brady in the lineup is this. If you're a Christian, you probably heard the thing, almsgiving covers a lot of sins. Hi, Caleb. Nice to have you. Well, Tom Brady covered a lot of sins for the Patriots, just like Donald Trump covered a lot of sins for blue states. And let me explain in some detail. Now, the advantage of having Tom Brady on the Patriots was the same as blue states having the advantage of Donald Trump in the White House. In that Brady lifts the game. No, I don't live in Townsend. I actually live in Fitchburg. To answer Caleb's question there. Feel free to ask me questions in chat. I'll answer them if I see them. So Patriots get Tom Brady. He develops. Brady gets, and one of the big advantages of Brady, frankly, was getting hurt in the Pittsburgh game that first year and being replaced by Bledsoe, who led them to victory. And that was nice, not only because Bledsoe could take some ownership in that Super Bowl. Without Bledsoe's performance in that game, they don't make it there. But it gave Brady the, I don't want to be beaten. I'm not going to lose that job again. Once you have Brady at quarterback, a lot of things change. Because remember that a pro athlete compared to a guy like me, he's way ahead of him. Brady is very, very physically fit compared to us. But the differences between pro athletes and other pro athletes aren't all that big. It's like it's the very end of a bell curve is the pro athletes versus us. But if you take that little stretch, you spread it out. A person who makes an NFL team is way far on the curve compared to us. But compared to other NFL players, maybe bigger or smaller. Tom Brady is on the far end on both sides. And when you have a Tom Brady, that means that if you have a mediocre receiver, suddenly he's going to look good because the ball will be closer to him. If you have a good receiver, he's going to look great. Suddenly, Danny Amendola, who's a good receiver, becomes a great receiver because now Brady's putting it right in there. And now the defender can't make that defensive play. A great receiver becomes a spectacular receiver. Think of Julian Edelman. He's a great receiver. Now, with Brady, he becomes spectacular. And a spectacular player like a Gronk, he becomes impossible. Think of Randy Moss, who was a spectacular player before he played with Brady. And think of how spectacular he was with Brady. And of course, it also did other things for the Patriots. Suddenly, their offense is on the field a lot longer, which means their defense in the fourth quarter is rested and is able to stop people, which means the other team's defense is on the field a lot, which is not rested, which means that Tom Brady can pick them apart because now he has that quarter step more. All those things take place because Tom Brady is on the field. And all those are advantages that Bill Belichick has. So if you have a bad draft, because you have Tom Brady, suddenly all these consequences of having, let's say, a lesser player or a person not fit or a guy who still has wind in the fourth quarter when he might not, they don't happen. So for 20 years, the sins of the Patriots were covered, and the Patriots, the last 10 years until last year, won their division. But what happens when Tom Brady is replaced by a Cam Newton, an average quarterback? Now suddenly you're not on the field as much. Suddenly your defense, which is well rested in the fourth quarter because Brady's eating up time with drives, is not as well rested. So that other team's quarterback has a little more space to put that ball in. Suddenly that guy who's used to having the ball in his hands on a throw has to make a play. And maybe a Julian Edelman can make it consistently. Maybe a Randy Moss could have made it consistently. But the guys who were there cannot. Suddenly your defense is on the field more. Your offense is on the field less. Your options decrease. The margin of error shrinks. And suddenly all those defects that didn't matter because you would still win 11 games become obvious. And suddenly the New England Patriots become a 7-9 sub 500 team. Now think about this in terms of Donald Trump. Donald Trump, by getting rid of regulations, created what I like to call the Trump boom. And the Trump boom was spectacular. During the Trump years, the average person, the bottom of the barrel guy, the blue collar guy, had his real wages increase. And it had an increase greater than the elites. Now, the elites' wages and the elites' wealth increased too, but not by the same proportion. For the people at the bottom, their lives got better under Trump. And because the economy was so strong, wonderful things were happening in a lot of different places. Now, to give an example, if you were a red state and this was happening, and you were already doing well because you were basically following solid principles on how to run government, you did even better. The Texases of the world. My leg is cramping, if you'll pardon, wondering why I'm moving around. The Texases of the world, the Floridas of the world, they did great. The North Dakotas. Under Trump, people had decent jobs, and when people have decent jobs, all the things around them do better. When energy goes down, when the price of energy, the basic cost for an American is the price of energy. The energy prices determine how much it costs for them to have electricity, how much it costs for them to get to work, how much it costs for them to get goods and services. A lot of people, if you ask kids, where does food come from? They will tell you the supermarket because they don't know better. They don't understand that food comes from farms, whether you're farming animals or you're farming crops. And the only reason why you have it in a supermarket is because those gasoline-powered trucks are driving them there. And the only reason why you can get those gasoline-powered trucks there is because other energy-consuming devices are getting the crops to a place where they can be processed fast enough. People don't understand how capitalism works. But the bottom line is, during the Trump years, the red states with good economies had great economies and thrived. And when they did responsible things, were able to use that boom responsibly. Now, let's say you're a blue state. Let's say you're Massachusetts. And you decide, hey, we're going to do our minimum wage raise. We're going to vote in a minimum wage hike. And they voted it in over 5 years. First year, everything goes up $1, then 75 cents a year. So now the minimum wage in Massachusetts is now $13.50. Well, lo and behold, when you're having a Trump boom, if you're a business and there's plenty of revenue coming in, you might be able to absorb that. But now when you've got a Trump bust, now the cost of that extra 75 cents an hour per person becomes a lot of money. I mean, if you're talking $30 a week That's $1,500 per person if you're doing something minimum wage. Think about what that means. What if you have 10 employees? Think of what $15,000 more in your labor costs means. And remember, these are labor costs not for doing these aren't raises for performance. These are raises regardless of performance. What's your incentive to perform harder if you know you're going to get the same raise as everybody else, whether you work hard or not? Why would you work harder? Why would you put yourself out there if you know there's no reward? But it's not just the minimum wage, it's about spending, about pensions. Chicago. When you've got more money coming in, then the pension bomb doesn't hit as fast. If you've got all those Trump tax revenues, if you've got all those business revenues, if you've got all those trucks driving, which means gasoline taxes, local gasoline taxes, if you've got people buying because they have more money, that means more sales taxes. That means more, all of these different taxes, all these different things that people get a piece of, meals taxes, all the different taxes that they have, property taxes, all of them increase. The pie grows. It's not just a question. It's not just I'm taking from the pie. We're making a bigger pie. It's like the old Doritos commercials with Jay Leno. Don't worry, we'll make more. With Donald Trump, they just made more. Make more. We'll do more innovation. We'll do more jobs. We'll do more things that produce wealth for the average person, because nothing has lifted the average person out of poverty more than capitalism. And Donald Trump is a great believer in capitalism. And so if you're in a blue state, if you're a business in a blue state and you've been there for a long time and you really don't want to move, your family's there, you've grown up here, you don't want to leave. If you have a Donald Trump boom and those extra revenues are coming in, yeah, maybe it'd be cheaper to go to Florida, but we're making it, we're getting by. Now what happens when Donald Trump is gone and the Donald Trump economy is gone? Now suddenly, your blue state isn't getting those revenues. Those tax revenues aren't there. And now you have to make it up. You have to make it up by either borrowing or taxing or both. And when you start borrowing, now maybe you don't have the money to fix those roads that you thought, well, we could have upgraded our roads. We could have helped out. We could have taken care of our transportation problem. We could use this extra money to solve some problems we had with our transportation system, or we could have paved roads. We could have done this. We could have done that. Well, maybe you didn't. Now, if you're a blue state, there's like Tom Brady no longer covering the mistakes of Bill Belichick. And not to say that Belichick's not a good coach. He is a good coach. But suddenly now you do not have a Trump economy covering for your mistakes. So suddenly that warehouse decides, I think we're going to save $5 an hour per employee if we move to Pennsylvania or maybe West Virginia or someplace else. Suddenly, the individual says, you know what? They're raising my taxes. I can't afford it anymore. And suddenly they're saying, when I had more money, I could do home security. But now that we're in a state where the police aren't going, we got a government and the police aren't going to be there for me anymore on small thefts or on a house break-in or so forth. Maybe it's not worth staying here. Blue states didn't realize, and I wrote about this several years ago, that they were going to miss Donald Trump. When the Trump boom was there, that was the time to do things to solve institutional problems. They didn't. Now the Biden bust is coming. And the Biden bust is going to hit blue states harder because they're mismanaged and because they presumed that the Trump prosperity would always be there. But you got to remember something. Prosperity is and if you know history, if you read history, I've been reading a history book, Essentials of Ancient History. It was published in 1902. And it is a secondary school history book containing only the essentials of history. And what's funny about it is that I was reading the book and a lot of the stuff. Now, remember, I was born in 1963. I was never taught most of the stuff that I've read so far. Now, I knew a lot of it because I'm a war gamer. I was an Avalon Hill gamer. And I played a lot of war games, and there was a lot of history written in them, so I had plenty of that stuff. But a lot of the stuff people aren't taught. And again, it was a book loaded for teachers, set up for teachers to teach children, secondary school children, the things they needed to do and teach them how to reason and look up facts. And that's the thing they don't have. And the blue states are just like this, in the sense that the blue states do not have, I'm trying to think of how I put this. They have not built an infrastructure for success. They have not built an infrastructure for success. And because they have not, when prosperity goes away, when a Donald Trump goes away, they have no safety valve. They have nothing. They don't have the reserves to save themselves. So average people are going to get hurt. Now, the thing is, it's not going to hurt the elites. All these decisions that the Biden administration are making help the elites. And that's why the reason why they're doing them, because in this respect, how do I say this? In this respect, the Biden administration is an awful lot like the Trump administration. And that might seem a little odd to you, but let me explain it. By the way, if you're wondering why I'm typing, I'm trying to find the book I was reading online. It's old enough and the copyright is expired that it might be free online for you to read. I prefer to have a hard copy, because hard copies is general. People can't edit them. I mean, if something's online, someone can choose to edit it. If you have an actual physical copy, then they can't edit it on you. But the bottom line is that you do not have, you do not have the essentials. You do not have the things you have to get by. Donald Trump provided those essentials. Booming economy. And none of these things are normal. If you look at history, prosperity is not normal. Prosperity, the ability to get by, is not normal. It's not. It does not happen organically. Even the ancient Greeks, where our civilization comes from, they were taught agriculture by the Phoenicians because they didn't know it. And I'm going to give you, I found the book. I'm going to give you, this is an online thing. It's actually a scan of a book that was in the New York Public Library. This is the book, this edition is from 1902. So I'm going to drop that in chat so that you can, if you want to read the book online at archive.org, you can, which is why I was searching. But the point is, all these things are not intrinsic. Freedom is not intrinsic. Prosperity is not intrinsic. Being able to hit the receiver is not intrinsic. You have to have someone who knows how to do it, who is able to do it. Tom Brady was able to do it for the Patriots, and now he's doing it someplace else. Donald Trump was able to do this for the United States. And now Joe Biden can't. And frankly, Joe Biden's not interested. And I mentioned that there was one thing in common between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. And what was in common was this. The Trump administration worked very hard for the average people because they understood, Donald Trump understood that the reason why he was president was because of the American people. He owed his presidency to the American people. And thus, because he did that, he made sure to take care of them. He knew who got him elected. Joe Biden had no problem throwing the pipe fitters who endorsed him out the window. He has no problem throwing New Mexico out the window. Because he understands, like Donald Trump, he understands who elected him, who gave him the presidency. And he understands, but unlike Donald Trump, it wasn't the people. And because it wasn't the people, because it was the swamp, he's making decisions, or who was ever making decisions, to reward the swamp, because he understands that it's the swamp that elected him. It's the swamp that made him president. It's the swamp that made sure that those votes would not be challenged, that those magic ballots would still be counted, and that even if the evidence was brought forth, that the votes would be there in Congress to save this deal. Joe Biden is rewarding the folks who put him in the White House. It's just that those folks don't happen to be the people. And that's what's in common between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. They both served the people who got them where they were. Well, that's all the time we're going to take today. I only wanted to do a short podcast. I've got a few other things to do on my day off because I'm going to be very busy on my other day off tomorrow. I want to thank you for joining us for the Spontaneous podcast. If you liked what you saw, spread it around. Let other people see it. If they ban me, big deal. If you really like it, hit the tip jar. That helps pay the bills here. But think about those things. And when you see blue states crumbling, think about how things were. And I suspect that you're going to see a lot of people wondering how they let themselves get into this position. The worst part about it is that we've done it to ourselves. This is how republics fall. We're not yet fallen, but we're pretty damn close. The next 4 years will tell. Well, again, thanks for joining us. You take care and you have a great rest of the day, and may your weekend be spectacular. Bye, all.